Great Salt Lake experienced her final glimmering sunset today, succumbing to a long struggle with chronic diversions exacerbated by climate change. She was born 13,000 years ago to Lake Bonneville, who occupied the basin previously, and the Holocene epoch, who melted ice and evaporated water. Her dusty remains will be scattered across the Salt Lake Valley for millennia, and we will be constantly reminded of her passing by our air quality monitors. She was preceded in death by her cousin, Owens Lake, who lived in California. She is survived by Mono Lake, whose family took legal action using the public trust doctrine to revive her when she was on life support. During her life, Great Salt Lake underwent many surgeries and amputations. She suffered blockages in her circulatory system, most significantly a transverse incision by a rail causeway, which restricted the flow of her fluids. Although it was common for her to expand and shrink her girth, the last 50 years of her life were especially tumultuous in this regard. When she was at her largest in the 1980s, the state of Utah insisted that she diet with intervention to protect her human neighbors from flooding. Ultimately, the thirst of a rapidly growing population upstream, which prevented her from refilling, caused a severe reduction in her size. As water was withheld, she began wasting away. Projects such as an inland port, Bear River development, relocating the state prison, and construction of a non-essential landfill put much strain on her. In her frail state, she was exposed to the planet's warming temperatures and local drought conditions. The combination of terminal dehydration and high fever caused her eventual demise. Great Salt Lake had a very salty personality and was known to her neighbors as stinky and buggy. She had the best memory, holding on to every mineral, pollutant, and sediment she ever encountered. Noted for hosting many around her table, she fed anyone who migrated by. Visitors could count on being accosted by her pet biting gnats in the spring, but would always leave her home with the most unique treasures. She loved people, especially those native inhabitants of the basin who built caves and traded salt, but also those humans who built funky buildings and partied on her beaches. A nonconformist, Great Salt Lake was infamous for wearing a palette of intriguing colors, not the usual blue of other lakes. Her wardrobe was steeped in lemonade pink, photosynthetic green, and sandy taupe. Her salty shorelines were ruffled and rugged. It was her northern red waters and ethereal characteristics that drew artist Robert Smithson to Utah to embellish her with his spiral jetty. She demonstrated her care and concern for people by floating them gently in her arms and never allowing them to sink. However, when disturbed, her short temper could quickly whip up the heavy waters into frothy waves that could capsize a boat and would leave foam blanketing the shoreline. Although not a skier, Great Salt Lake was an avid donor to the ski industry, contributing her lake effect to the greatest snow on Earth. During the summer months, she enjoyed paddleboarding, canoeing, and sailing. She combined her love of chemistry and aesthetics to create many rusted pieces of art. She served as a model for many artists over the years who echoed her uncommon beauty in their work. She was a committed volunteer for her local environment, spending her time absorbing heavy metals and balancing nutrients. Always an avid bird watcher, Great Salt Lake earned a PhD in ornithology, observing 338 bird species over thousands of years. She was an entrepreneur, supporting an array of businesses from brine shrimp harvesting to salt extraction. As a hobbyist, she collected old boats, wooden railroad trestles, and an occasional airplane. Great Salt Lake was an award-winning ecosystem. In fact, she was lauded as a site of hemispheric importance for birds. For centuries, she hosted one of the largest breeding colonies of white pelicans in the world. For decades, she hosted the annual Great Salt Lake Bird Festival, the Great Salt Lake Open Water Swim, and Antelope Island Spider Festival. She was a noted activist for diversity, understanding that life of all sorts has equal value in the world. Once, standing in protest, she challenged the Utah Department of Environmental Quality to develop water quality standards made difficult by her high salt content, leading to equity for salt lakes everywhere. For this work, and that for her inclusion of Native people in her history, she is often referred to as Notorious GSL. There was action to prevent the death of Great Salt Lake, but it was too little too late. In 2022, fueled with federal infrastructure dollars, the Utah State Legislature passed several bills that attempted to bring more water to her basin. But the megadrought of the Southwest and climate change were not so easily overcome. She supported Utah's economy for many years, but we did not adequately fund her health care in time. Had we done so, we may not be mourning her death today. Utah regrets the loss of this unique piece of its identity, as does the lake's namesake, Salt Lake City. The state is still struggling with 7,706 employment casualties when the brine shrimp and salt extraction companies literally dried up. Also, 1 million tourists no longer visit Utah since the closure of state and federal lands surrounding Great Salt Lake. With her death, Utahns now pay more for their water treatment, and the ski season is limited to just a few weeks. They are also suffering additional health costs from dust exposure and a spiritual loss of this cultural hub. She will be missed by the 85,000 American white pelicans who nested and fed around the lake, the 5 million eared grebes that fed on the abundant brine shrimp in her salty waters, and their 10 million avian colleagues who loved Great Salt Lake for millennia. The greatest loss is the opportunity for folks to connect, find common ground, and work together to save her. Her friends and family would like to express thanks to the many people who pled for action on behalf of Great Salt Lake. Our gratitude is extended to state and federal agencies, community members, advocacy groups, and the many research scientists and students who strive to understand her and who spread the word about her importance. In lieu of flowers, conserve water, and call your legislators to advocate for smart water laws. In keeping with her salty personality, she requested that her admirers play the song, "Another One Bites the Dust," at her memorial.